Oh, I guess I was muted during the whole time when I was talking. Sorry. Let me go back. My bad. So sorry, housekeeping. All participants are muted. Recording of this webinar will be sent to all attendees following the session. Questions submitted via the questions box, you can see it on the right side in your control panel, will be addressed at the end of our Fireside chat. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email us at marketing@heap.io. With that said, let me introduce today's host, Rachel Obstler. Rachel Obstler is the Vice President of Product at Heap Analytics. She held product leadership roles at multiple companies, including Keynote, Dynatrace, and most recently PagerDuty, which she joined pre-IPO. Rachel, I'm handing it over to you.
Thanks, Jörg. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. And I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Dan Olsen. Dan Olsen is a product management trainer, consultant, and author of the Lean Product Playbook. And at Olsen Solutions, Dan works with CEOs and product leaders to build really strong product teams. Dan's also the founder of the Lead Product Meetup series, speaker series, and product community. So Dan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Rachel. Nice to be here with you today.
So 2020 has been a really interesting year, and I think probably like a lot of the people and yourself on this webinar, I'm very happy that it is now in our rear view mirror. But now that we're in 2021, it is always good to take a look back and to see what you can learn about what's happened in the past. And so, you know, given that it was such an interesting year in so many different ways, what did you see working with all of the different companies that you talked to are like the biggest changes in the practice of product management?
Yeah, it was a crazy year and a good reminder about having an agile mindset and being able to iterate and adapt, right? So yeah, I think, and I saw a lot of product teams do that and a lot of companies do that. So for me, the two biggest trends, one is just a continuation of a trend that I've seen and I'm happy to see, which is kind of the growth and emergence of product management, right? So for several years now, we've been kind of growing, and you hear more and more product people, more and more people getting into the field. And so that's super exciting, and I expect that to continue. And the way I rationalize that is, you know, Mark Andreessen famously said, software is eating the world. He said that a while ago, and I think companies in the last, 5+ years are waking up and realizing, well, if we want to have good software that's successful and meets our business objectives and meets customer needs, we need someone to kind of oversee that, and that's the product management role. So, back in the day, I know we went to business school about the same time. You get the articles about this product management report, should it report into marketing or engineering? And so luckily you don't see those kind of articles, these days. It's pretty much realized that product management is its own discipline, and increasingly you see that head of product reporting directly to the CEO or to the business unit manager, general manager, or whatever. So that's great to see. More and more people enter the field, and the importance of the field be acknowledged. That's the first trend. So I don't know if you've seen anything along those lines in the last year.
I have certainly seen that as well. Certainly there's not less interest in product management. I see more and more. I also see, and this makes me very happy, but more and more people entering the field of product management. And personally, I like the fact that there's more and more women entering the field of product management.
Yes.
So that's been a really nice thing. And actually at PagerDuty, I was really happy that I was able to grow the team, number one, but also really change the percentage of gender in the organization and got us to about 50-50, which was a really nice thing to see. And I see more and more women entering the field, which is cool for me.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'll just give a shout out and a plug for Women in Product. There's a great organization focused on that mission. And they just recently announced their conference is typically in the fall in September, and they announced that it's going to be virtual. They're pulling it forward to this spring. So for the female product managers out there, check out Women in Product. And I've been fortunate enough to attend, so I've actually gone to it and taught a workshop there, and it was great. This is a very positive vibe, very good organization with a lot of great events. So I would definitely check those out. Yeah, and then the other big trend is obviously with COVID is the increase in remote work. And I think in the tech world, many companies were already leaning this way and starting to do this, or parts of their team were doing it. And so I think a lot of teams already had kind of the infrastructure with Zoom and Slack and things in place, but all of a sudden everybody had to do it. And so everybody had to go to like 100% remote work. So that was a change. And I think it just, when you're trying to collaborate with people, it's obviously way easier if you're all in the same room. You can have higher fidelity discussions. You can be there with your cross-functional partners in engineering and design or marketing or business, and just you have better conversations. So I think some PMs that went from in-person to remote were struggling with, well, how do I collaborate here? And so we obviously have tools like Slack and Jira and Trello that support that. But then some of the ceremonies like the stand-ups, transitioning those to virtual. And then the other thing is, just as a PM, no one reports to us. So, maintaining those relationships. So I think, a lot of the successful PMs I've seen went out of their way to explicitly schedule that, because normally it'd be casually happen as you're walking down the hallway or walking by someone's cube or something, you could kind of catch up, but that kind of went away. So I saw companies doing some like Friday happy hour, but also just, even if it's every other week, setting up a 30-minute or even a 15-minute touch base with your key, like your tech lead or your engineering manager or your key designer, right? And with designers, that's the one area where I feel like in-person collaboration is really beneficial, because you can get on a whiteboard together, right? And you're in person. And so I've been excited to see there's been some cool tools out there, Mural and Miro, like virtual whiteboards. They were around before COVID. I think more and more teams have checked it out and embraced it. I've used those tools in some of my workshops. It's been really powerful. And then, other tools like InVision has been around for a while, but also Figma is emerging as a popular tool. So it's good to see that. And in the third area of remote work being a challenge is talking to customers or users. Again, talking to them in person is great. A lot of people were already talking to them remotely because it was geographically inconvenient. So now you kind of have to do all of your customer research or user research as far as talking to customers virtually. And so, setting those up, getting people on the team that can take care of the logistics for you, and setting that up is just important, so that you maintain that customer contact despite us all being isolated.
Yeah, I agree with that. One thing that I saw at PagerDuty, when we transitioned to go fully remote, it wasn't so bad, because we always had a multi-located team. And so almost all of our stand-ups were not all the same people in one room, but it would be in at least 2 different rooms. And
Right.
So it wasn't too much of a transition, but it did definitely, I would say, change my opinions about remote product management, because I'd always been not that much of a fan of it. I think it is really important to have those in-person interactions, but it kind of does prove that you can be effective being fully remote. You just have to do the extra effort in certain ways. And then everyone else in the company really has to know how to operate. Like if there are going to be people in and off in a room together and then some remote, you have to put the extra effort in to make sure that works.
Yeah, and that's true when you have a hybrid of some people in there. Yeah, exactly. And one of my clients, Medallia, years ago was really good at that, because they had an Argentina office, and so they put the video cameras and TVs in all the rooms, and so it was just a given. Like you did it, you set the meeting up as if everyone was there. You didn't forget. It was like, oh, we forgot about the East Coast stuff. We forgot about them with element again. So it was all pretty easy. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, you have to adapt. Like if you were in person operating at this level of effectiveness, and all of a sudden, being remote knocks you down to here, you got to figure out how to close some of that gap, like by adapting and changing. And some things can get more efficient. Like the stand-ups. Some teams would already fill out the kind of what did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? What's my blockers? They would use some online templates to do that pre-meeting. And so everybody kind of scans that real quick. So you actually save time versus everybody having to go around the ring. You kind of look at it and you tend to handle exceptions. So if you build up robust communication platforms, you can transition to more exception handling and only talking about the issues as opposed to like spending time on everything that's going okay. So that's something I've seen teams do. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see how this has made work evolve. I think more people have embraced Zoom sooner than they would have. I'm curious how you see work evolving beyond this, given where we are. Like when enough people have a vaccine, are we going to go back to normal? Is things going to stay different? What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of people are going to want to stay working from home at least a higher percent of the time than they did before. Most people I've talked to have been enjoying working from home to some extent, but almost everyone also says that they do miss the camaraderie of the office or being able to get in that room and do brainstorming together.
Yeah.
So I think that there's going to be a really interesting hybrid model that needs to emerge, where there is a workspace, but it's not something that people go to necessarily every day. But maybe there'll be a couple days a week that certain teams will be going into the office and being there together, because I also think if you're going into the office and no one else you work with is there, right, that makes no sense either, unless you're trying to find a quieter place to work. That could be true, right? You just need a more comfortable place to work. So I think there are going to be some really interesting hybrid models showing up.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. It's like, okay, let's go in 2 days a week. Well, if you go in on Monday, but your engineer goes in on Tuesday and your designer goes in on Wednesday, that's not going to work so well. So yeah, maybe the teams are going to have to coordinate, which days they're in. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yep. So building on some of the trends, I've seen that product-led growth has become like the next big buzzword in the industry. What are the key things that you think product managers need to think about when they're trying to drive product-led growth or, change their product to be more product-led?
Yeah, no, and I think it's great, to see the emergence of product-led growth. For anyone on the call that may not know what it is, so product-led growth is trying to get at how can you use your product to sell better, to reach new users, to acquire new users without sales team explicitly being involved, and how can you grow deeper relationships, get people to use more of your product, upgrade to higher tiers and things like that. That's what product-led growth is. So it's really exciting when you realize that it's possible, because the old school model is, well, sales for enterprise. We're talking about enterprise software. Well, sales team's got to sell it. That's how we sell. And you see, Atlassian is a classic example of product-led growth, where the amount of money they spend on sales and marketing is significantly lower as a percentage of revenue than other companies, because the product sells itself. So if you've got some intrinsic viral quality, or it's a social product or a workflow product or a team product or a community product, you kind of get some natural virality that can happen there. So it is exciting to see teams focus on that. A lot of it is just focused on, good product management, it's focused on the combination of qualitative insights, right? Of course you're gonna look at the metrics. So it's based on analytics. You're gonna look at what is our, funnel conversion rate, our onboarding conversion rate. Because if your onboarding conversion rate is bad, then this product-led growth is not gonna work. And what is our retention rate, right? That's really one of the key factors, is, as I talk about in my talk, is retention rate. Are people coming back and using it again and again? And because those are the people that are going to help you with product-led growth. But combining those quantitative insights, which tell you what's going on and how many people are doing this, you don't know why. Why are these people retaining? Why is other people not retaining? So you got to couple it with the qualitative insights. And one of the most important groups to talk to is actually what we call abandoners. So people that started using your product, but then they left. That's where you get a lot of great insight to be like, okay, we clearly made some promise. You came in, it was good enough. The sales pitch was good enough that you tried it, but then you stopped using it. What happened? Where did we let you down? And that's one of the best places to mine for ways to improve your retention rate. And as I like to recommend in my talk, I like to focus on retention rate first, so you can patch up that leaky bucket. Everybody starts out with a leaky bucket. Patch it up enough. It's never going to be perfect. Even the best products in the world have far less than 100% retention rate. And then you can focus on conversion rate optimization, right? So once your bucket is not leaky, let's improve how we get people into the bucket. And then from there, once those two are solid, then you can focus on more acquisition and things. So that way you'll get a higher ROI on your acquisition when you go. So it's interesting because it's a combination of product market fit with your product. It's a combination of good onboarding. It's a combination of good messaging, you know, and combination of thinking about how can we get our existing users to help us get more users, and how can we deepen our relationship. So it's a nice, interesting puzzle to solve, and it's great to see a lot of companies have really leveraged it to enjoy really big growth.
Yeah, and to your point, it's not just product management, right? It's
right.
It involves all the functions in the organization, really.
That's right, and it's funny because as product manager, we're so focused on the product, you know, and we have this, imagine this amazing product, but it's like behind this, like, you know, registration process or landing page. Well, if that landing page isn't great, no one's even going to get to see this wonderful product, right? So yeah, exactly, the messaging, and because the expectations get set from the beginning. What did the landing page promise you that this product was going to do? And if they get in there and it doesn't meet that promise, that's where there's a disconnect that can lead to abandonment, basically. Yeah. I'm curious, I'm guessing at PagerDuty you focused on that. So what are some key learnings from product-led growth there?
That's a great question. You know, one thing that I learned is early on being there, you know, we really took a step back and looked at a lot of those metrics that you're talking about. And it's almost, you don't know what you don't know until you do that. So, you know, one thing that we found that was really interesting is we looked a lot at how customers grew over time. And we found that that about like a large percentage, I want to share, you know, non-public numbers, but a large percentage of our big customers started out being very small customers, right? So we're talking like 0 to 10 users.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about as small as you can get to start. And so, you know, what that tells you is, it tells you a lot about where you should be making investments and how important product-led growth is to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if, you know, the majority of your big customers are landed by sales, then, you know, that's where you spend your money. But if a large portion of your big customers actually start as very small customers, and that doesn't mean that sales isn't involved through the process as they get big.
Sure.
It's, you know, clearly involved in the process as they get bigger. But if a lot of them are starting very small, even if it's a small percentage of your small customers that end up getting big, but that ends up being a big percentage of your large customers, that tells you a lot about where you should be investing and how important product-led growth is. So that was a really important learning for us.
And I think that's something you see more commonly in enterprise SaaS, is this, instead of it being a tops-down sales process, it's more of a bottoms-up. Like some product manager in the org said, we need an analytics solution. Let me go find some. And they start, you know, they try it with a free trial, or you know, one of my clients, Box, from back in the day, was very successful with this. It would be bottoms up. Different pockets of people in a company would be using Box, and then Box would look at the data. And then to your point, they say, hey, sales team, just so you know, like 15% of the company's already using it. When you go talk to so you go in there, you roll in and say, hey, by the way, 15% of your company's already using it. Do you want to do like an enterprise deal here? Then it's a much easier sell, you know, to do that. And to your point, it makes it important to really understand who your target market is. It's really easy to fall in the trap of, oh, it's, you know, it's Fortune 100 or whatever. And it's funny because if all you do is focus on sales, then how do you know? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. How do you know if product-led growth is going to work for you or not? So it's kind of like you should always be experimenting on the margins to see if there's other opportunities. And it's a portfolio approach. So you're going to have your, you know, sales-led stuff, your product-led stuff. Yeah.
Also, talking about looking at metrics. So you and I talked a bit earlier, and I think we're both kind of data geeks and don't mind people calling us that.
That's right.
You know, when you look at product-led growth, or in general the product process, like when do you think it's most crucial for product managers to leverage data?
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a trick question, I know.
Yeah. Never. Do not look at data.
Yeah.
That's the right answer, right? No, that's not the right answer. That's right. Yeah. And on the geek, I'm an electrical engineering major, so you know, one of the jokes from college is you can't spell geek without double E. So yes, geek, and I'm proud. But back to the question of, you know, when should you? It's basically at all stages, and it's easy to say that, but we can break it down, you know, And I do think it depends on the stage of product market fit. If you're entering a new market or developing for a new audience, or developing a new product, then you're going to want to do discovery research, right? And there's, at a high level, there's a difference between delivery, which is building the product, development and building it, and discovery, like figuring out what should we build. And traditionally, many companies spend like 90+% of their time and resources on delivery. So, discovery is important to de-risk to delivery. Before you go build it, let's get some confidence that our hypotheses are right. So in that beginning discovery, honestly, when you're kind of more like blue sky, greenfield, it's qualitative. You need to go out there and talk to people. And I talk about the problem space. You need to like get in there, get your fingers dirty, and really understand what they're saying. Of course, we're going to try to pattern match across the different qualitative interviews that we do, but you really got to get that rich qualitative data. One mistake I see teams make is they try to leverage surveys way too early. Hey, we want to enter this market, let's do a survey. And surveys are not necessarily they're a good tool used the right way, but not in early discovery when you have a lot of uncertainty. So that's the one, is if and now if you're in a mature product space, you've got 8% market share, and you're like, okay, we know this market, then maybe you don't need to do that discovery research as a big project like that as frequently. You obviously want to still have qual to maintain, be in touch with your customers, understand if things are changing or trending. The other thing is, after you discover, you say, okay, cool, now we know what to build. You go, you define your functionality, your feature set, your scope, and then the next phase would be design. And so, again, before design is finalized, it'd be great to go run it by some customers and see what they say, right? So we can iterate and tweak it, because chances are we didn't get 100% right. None of these things we get 100% right the first time. So we try to get as good as we can, but then we got to get out there and get feedback. So that's the other explicit place, is in the design phase to go out. And then obviously after you launch it, all that stuff we do pre-launch is to de-risk it and increase the odds of success. But until it's really a live product that's out there on a real server where people are kicking the tires, it's great to do that. We should do that. But then we get the real data of who really came and is using it and how are they using it. And that's where analytics can really come in, right? At this point now, we've got users kicking the tires using it. We can see what are they using, what are they not using, where are they dropping off, So those are at least 3 things. So in the beginning of discovery, especially if you're in a new market or new opportunity, post-design, and then post-launch.
Awesome. I'm sure as you've worked with lots of different companies that you've seen organizations that do or don't leverage data more or less effectively. What I don't know, what do you see are often the biggest blockers towards effective use of data?
Yeah, and I'll start out, basically fundamentally you've got qualitative and quantitative. And so when you hear data, people tend to think quantitative, but I think in general, you can use it more broadly to say what kind of evidence are we getting, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. And I like to describe those 2 distinct approaches by personifying them. And so for the data driven, I think about who really loves logic and analytics, and it makes me think of Spock from Star Trek. So there's the Spock mindset, the quantitative mindset. And then on the qualitative side, when I think of who's really good at sitting down with people one-on-one and getting them to open up and really empathizing with them and understanding what makes them tick, I think of Oprah. So that's the qualitative side. You got Oprah versus Spock, basically, right? And I'll just begin by saying companies tend to have like a cultural center of gravity, usually by the founder. So if your founder was a complete, data geek Spockhead, then your company's going to probably lean more towards the data side. If your company, was founded by someone who's not, then you might not. So that's one of the reasons, just kind of what's the cultural norm. Not that it can't change, or not that you can have pockets. Like if you add a data team or analytics team, or you just hired a bunch of Spocks, they're going to go figure that out, right? So that's cool. The other one though is just, if you've never been in a place, like let's focus on analytics more, because that's the one that tends, if you've never been in a place that's done like world-class analytics, product analytics, you just don't know what you don't know. Back to the point about not knowing what you know. You haven't seen what great looks like or what good looks like, right? And whereas conversely, I've seen people that come from an organization like that, and then they go to a less mature organization. And I think of it like a maturity model. There's like a metrics maturity model, starting with, hey, I'm not aware of this and we're not tracking anything, all the way to the highest level of, we've got full transparency, we've got defined dashboards, anybody can see the data. We have all the metrics slice and dice the way you want. We also, at that point, experimentation becomes part of the maturity model as well. It's easy for anybody to kind of roll out a quick test and see what they want. So that's kind of this metrics maturity model. And so it's a journey, like a lot of things in product management, like Agile, it's a journey, right? No one's perfect. You know, you go along your journey basically. So back to that, I mean, the next level is, you know, do we see the value of it? And once we see the value, it's like, okay, are we actually tracking anything? You know, do we have an analytics package in place or not? And that's where you see a wide range of things from, obviously people start out with nothing. A lot of times they'll just grab Google Analytics because it's free and easy, right? And then you've got like the more best in breed, you know, analytics packages, including Heap and, you know, other companies out there. So, and then the other thing is some people decide to do it, they try to do it homegrown. They try to build this, right, themselves. And so obviously at the end of the day, like their database is a good source of truth for certain things, but I see some companies invest way too much time in building their own analytics platform when there are good third-party platforms out there. So at the end of the day, you're going to have a hybrid of some of the key data is going to come from your database or financial systems. Some of it's going to come from, you know, a tool like Heap, you know, and so that's it. And then I think the next level up is just, okay, you usually start out with like one person who's the analytics guru, right? Some PM who's a data geek like us, who steps up and says, hey, I want to do a free trial here. Is like, how do you then spread it out and kind of democratize it? And I think that's the next level is like, okay, the whole product management team can go in and look at this now, or anyone on the engineering team can look at it, right? And so the people are comfortable with that. So again, it's an interesting journey. I will say that companies that are more mature in that model have an advantage over the competitors because they're getting key insights that the other people aren't. And there's this whole hypothesize, design, test, learn loop. And so, you know, they're able to go through that loop much quicker because they're getting the data. And then when they decide to try something new, they're getting the results more quickly, basically, right? So they're learning and experimenting more quickly. That can be a big source of competitive advantage. And I've seen that in some markets where a smaller, less resource competitor is able to lap a bigger competitor because they're just better at that analytics muscle and faster at that learning curve.
Well, so as you know, I have just started as the VP of Product at Heap. So day one, and you know, what advice would you give me or anyone else who's new at a company, and either, you know, maybe they're new or they're launching a new product and they want to make sure that they, you know, do analytics right?
Okay, well, I was just gonna give quick general advice, then we get into analytics, but like on the general advice, I mean, I coach and advise a lot of product leaders, and when you join a new company, it's a unique time. You know, you're just coming off your previous company as a product leader. I'm sure your calendar was full, you're super busy. When you start a new job, you're the new kid on the block. You don't yet have all those recurring meetings on your calendar. You know, you have time, and so
you have no idea how much I'm looking forward to that.
I know. So like before the sand fills the jar, go take advantage of it to meet people, right? Because right now you can also say, hey, I'm the new kid on the block. Can I talk to you about what your job is? And this is obviously it's important for product leaders, but especially product managers, right? Because like this is your chance to go meet anybody in marketing, anyone in design, anyone in engineering, and just say, hey, I'm new to company X. I'd really love to learn, get to know you and learn about your job and how PM can work effectively with you. Because once you've been there 3 months, that sales pitch isn't going to fly. They're going to be like, nah, you're not the new kid on the block anymore. You lose that kind of card that you can play. And so it's important to build those relationships so that later when something comes down the pike and it's like, oh, we got to work with marketing on something, you're not just going to the marketing department not knowing anybody. You can at least be like, oh, there was Sally hey, Sally. And if she's not the right person, she can help you. So anyway, it's unique. The number one thing I would say is meet people, meet as many people as you can before your calendar fills up, you know, and listen, just listen, like be a sponge, right? Obviously you're probably bringing some good product management skills to the table. That's why you got hired, but there's a lot to learn about the company, the domain and all that. So just listen before, I mean, I think product managers should have, at the end of the day, product management is decision-making and making good decisions under uncertainty, you know, with a group of people that don't report to you. So you have to have a point of view and make a recommendation. And sometimes you need to advocate strongly, but in the beginning, you should do more listening than advocating. I think I've seen some talented PMs come in too hot, too early and go, they're like a week, it's like, oh, we got to redesign this. You know, it's like, okay. And even if you may be right, but let's just, get the thing. So back to analytics, what can they do? They can see where they're at in the maturity model. Where are we? Do we have an analytics package in place? One thing I forgot to mention is most of the leading platforms, it's super easy to just do they have a free trial, and there's like a JavaScript include. You get your engineering team to put in the JavaScript include, and then the cool thing, like a lot of tools, is then it decouples where people can play around with analytics without having to bug engineering to constantly do stuff. And as we know, that's one of the advantages of Heap is the auto tracking, right? So you don't have to, every time you want to do new analytics instrumentation, you don't have to go bug engineering again and again and again. So if you get that JavaScript code in once, then I would assess, hey, where are we at? It's really has nothing to do with the tool at this point. It has to do with where are we at on defining our key metrics? Do we as an organization understand what our North Star metric is, what our key metrics are, so that we can start tracking them and start getting dashboards on them and the right level of weekly reporting or monthly reporting, and creating those dashboards so everybody can just go in and look and see, and I like to think of it as like a control panel. Like, do you have the control panel for your business or your product line? Is that in place? And then once that's in place, then now we can start to experiment and say, great, conversion rate for this one flow is 25%. We think that's too low. What are our top ideas for how to improve it? And then you can start experimenting and see the results. So then your process is under control at that point, right? It's not like you don't know what you don't know. And naturally questions are gonna come up, you're gonna go, huh? And you're gonna peel the onion and come up with new metrics and improve your metrics over time. So it's an exciting, the funny thing is I've helped a lot of clients there too, is when you first kind of are building the analytics muscle, because you haven't been really looking and paying attention, you didn't know what you didn't know. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit usually, that like what I call silver bullet opportunities. Like with a little bit of effort, it can really move the needle on a key metric because it hasn't been optimized yet.
That's awesome. Well, before we run out of time for questions, I want to ask my favorite question, which is, what predictions do you have for product management in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, I think I really like this trend of it growing in importance. It's so funny, no one really ever said, the importance of engineering was never in doubt, right? Without code, you can't ship a product. So that was never the case. And design kind of went through for a while, and nobody really understood what designers did, and they reported. I remember when I was at Intel, we had one designer on the engineering team, and now design's kind of more of a thing. And I feel like PM is definitely a thing now. So I think that's going to keep growing in importance. I think, like you were saying, more people are going to continue to enter our field. It's like a pyramid, and so the new people enter at the bottom. I feel like the base of the pyramid is constantly getting bigger, which also means you're getting more product leaders than you ever had before, because people are naturally moving up and you need people to manage that. And so another event, one of the events that I organize is Product Leaders Summit, just for product leaders. And I think as you see the population of product leaders growing, you're seeing more events tailored just for that audience, whereas a lot of conferences are for more, junior PM or senior PM level. So that's one thing. And then I think, as more people enter the field, it's not like my wife's a doctor, you get an MD, or you're an accountant, you get a CPA. There's not like this formalized educational training pipeline for PM. So all these people coming in or want to come in, and they need some training, and they need, it's also, they want to compare notes. Am I doing this right? How are you doing it? So it can be a lonely job because we're all so busy. PMs usually have their plate full, that even if you're on a team of 6 other PMs, you're too busy off doing your stuff. You don't have time to go compare notes with your fellow PMs per se, right? So that's why one thing I see a lot more now as PM has emerged is more companies doing annual or quarterly or twice a year offsites with their product team, just to take a break out of the day-to-day, get your head up out of the trenches, and let's talk about how we do product work here at our company. And sometimes they bring in external speakers, but even if they don't, it's just a great way for people to compare notes and up-level each other. You see a growth in workshops. I love teaching workshops for people, online communities. And that, again, just to mention the Lean Product Meetup that I run, we have 10,000 members. I started it 7 years ago. And so it's been a great community for people to get together and compare notes and learn from thought leaders. You're also seeing Slack channels emerge. So if you're not on some of the more popular PM Slack channels, there's a handful of good ones out there. So that's I think that's going to continue to grow, and the demand and desire for that community and comparing notes and training will continue to grow. And then I think analytics is on a similar evolutionary path. right? And there's constantly going to be people starting from scratch, but it's really like, what is best in class doing? What are the best, what are the Three Sigma people doing? Like the bar is continuing to raise on that front. And so, I think that you're going to see even more evolution of analytics that are out there. It's funny because back in the day, even though everybody realized retention is really important, years ago, there weren't tools that would really track it that effectively for you. And then everyone realized this is really important. So then the tools adapted and now you can track it. And now you can actually slice and dice your retention by different cohorts and things like that, right? So that's pretty exciting. So I think the tools are going to continue. And then I think likewise, like the top of that maturity model is experimentation. And I think some people have done experimentation. There's like front end, which is kind of easier, like moving buttons around, changing image, changing titles. An increasing trend you're seeing is people doing back-end experimentation, where actually the features and functionality, you're using feature flags. Before you roll something out, you're rolling it out to a small audience, kind of like the things that Amazon and Google have been doing for a long time with homegrown systems, where you go to Amazon, I might see a different page than you do because I'm in an A/B test. Those kind of abilities from third-party providers are expanding that are gonna, again, let people get learning quicker and experiment and iterate and improve their metrics more quickly. So that's, I think, an important trend that we'll see hopefully over the next year or two as well.
Awesome. Great predictions. So I think now we will open it to questions, and Jörg is going to let us know what questions we have. Just a quick reminder, any questions you have, please write them in the questions section of the control panel.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Dan. Let's start with a question from Juan. How do you differentiate product-led versus business-driven requirements? And to add on, how do you prioritize those? I'll send this over to you, Dan.
Yeah, so thanks, Juan, for your question. I think this touches on something you see a lot, especially, so like every business and every product has a life cycle, right? There's like, you start out, scrappy and trying to succeed. And then eventually, if you're lucky, you get to like the mature phase. What I see happen with a lot of companies when they get to the mature phase is what got them to that phase is they were customer centric. They were listening to customers and iterating. But what can happen as top line growth becomes more challenging, especially also if you become a public company, every quarter you've got to try to hit your earnings number. So there's this natural kind of gravitational pull towards business metrics. And as your company gets bigger, that can happen. It doesn't happen in all companies, but it's very common that as your company is more successful, matures, gets larger, is public, is more on the hook for business results to public shareholders, then there's a natural pull away from being customer centric to business. So there can be a tension that you feel where it's like all the KPIs and all the things that are coming down for objectives are not actually customer focused objectives or business objectives. Hey, we need to grow revenue by 5%. And look, it's fine to have a revenue target, but then the next thing is, great, what do we need to do in the product that's going to help us do that? And it's never going to be a perfect black and white causality. You can never say, by building this feature, we're going to increase revenue by $55,000 next quarter. It's never quite that scientific, but there is causality, right? There is causality. And so I think of course, you want to keep your eye on the business metrics, but the real question is, how can we deliver customer value that's going to improve the business value, the business metrics, right? And the general idea here, and a lot of my frameworks focus on customer value. The general idea is if you create customer value, then you're going to be able to capture that incremental value. If you're creating more value, you should be able to capture it from your revenue model. So, I think it's important to be mindful of the business metrics, but you don't want to lose sight of the customer problems you're trying to solve.
Maybe I could just add something to that too, which is I also do see it as a little bit of a two-step process. Like you have to add the customer value, but you have to have a hypothesis or belief that customer value will then impact the business metrics, and then test and see if it indeed does it or not. The hard part is you never know 100%, right? That's a hard thing to know, but you certainly can have a hypothesis about it, you can test it, and you can learn over time so you get better at knowing which customer things that you should invest in that will also have an impact on the business. So it's almost like a second filter. Right, here's all the customer facing things we could do. Yeah. Which ones do we think will have the biggest impact also on the business?
Yeah, and I think that's good. And I think the other thing, you don't see this too often. Every once in a while, you do see a company that's got, say, like a single product, and they add more features constantly, but they're not charging anymore for it. And you know, like, let me take a step back. If you're gonna do some initiatives that are gonna improve retention rate, pretty easy to say a 5% increase in retention rate. Here's what it translates into lifetime value of a customer. That's just a formula we can all figure out. If you're gonna improve your conversion rate, pretty easy to translate that to dollars. Likewise, you can always look for better acquisition channels. It really comes down to when you're adding some new functionality, or, you know, like, we think we're creating customer, but we're using all these techniques to talk about to convince ourselves we're going to add a decent amount of value to customers. How are we going to capture that value? And I see far too often a loose thing where people go, well, people will love our product more, so the retention should be better and the word of mouth should be better. That's a little too loose, right? So that's a little too loose. And at some point, you know, you need to be like, well, maybe we should have another tier. Instead of having a single tier, let's tier it and let's segment our market based on their needs. And I love, you know, Ben, back to product-led growth, some of the most successful SaaS companies, they do that. You know, it reminds me of my client, You Send It. It was freemium. Come on in, send some files. Oh, that file's a little bigger than 50 megabytes. Oh, well, you got to pay for that. Okay. Oh, you want to send 10th file this month? Okay, well, sounds like you're using us a lot. We need you to upgrade to the basic tier. So you can get pretty sophisticated where, you know, you're providing value. And then as you add more stuff, add more features, you're getting really clear on how are we going to capture that value, you know. And it can be hard to increase the price, as we know, you can't just suddenly increase the price of your offering because you've got people grandfathered in. So tiering is one way to do it. If you can get to some kind of transaction or volume-based pricing, that's another way to do it. So anyway, it is a challenge. Yeah, for sure, Rachel. I appreciate the point you brought up.
Yeah, and I also think what you're saying really points to how integrated you need the practice of pricing in the product development process. And I don't see a lot of companies doing that. But I think at the very beginning, when you're thinking about something, you should at least be asking the question, like, you know, do we need to consider pricing, and you know, how does that play into it?
Yeah, pricing for most companies is like this black box. It's just like this, I don't know. Marketing, you tell us. Marketing's like, I don't know, you tell. You know, it's like passing a hot potato. Like, and then somebody just kind of comes up with something. They look at some competitors. They say, you know, it's for the price of 2 lattes a month, you can use our SaaS solution. So usually they end up, for some reason, it always gets related to how many lattes, you know, it equates to. So yeah.
Great. Here's a good question for Rachel. What are the hardest product decisions you had to make, and why?
I hope this won't sound like a cop-out, but I think the hardest product decisions, well, there's 2 things I would say. One is not just prioritization, but it's almost having a view of how many things you can do at the same time, right? So it's a step beyond prioritization. You can have a stack rank of your priorities. There's a lot of different ways to do prioritization, but where do you draw the line? I think is one of the hardest things, because you can, you know, there's a point in which you're trying to do too many things, and so then none of the things that you're doing will be done well. And so I think that's one of the hardest decisions, is knowing where to draw the line so that you're not spreading yourself too thin. And then the second one I would say is it's always hard to kill something. So making the decision to kill something always happens later than it should, you know, and being brave about, you know, maybe making a couple customers unhappy, but being able to, it gets back to the first issue, because you can't spread yourself too thin. And so you're constantly trying to make space for the teams to be able to do more. So it's both knowing where to draw the line, and then also doing hard things so that you're creating more space to do what you need to do.
Yeah, I would build on your first point. I mean, to say it another way, it's like saying no, right? So many organizations I work with, the bias is yes. You know, some stakeholder asks you, PM, can we work this in the release? Yeah, sure. It's VP. I better say yes, right? And yeah, so it's that, and it's breadth versus depth. You can bite off too many things and do them poorly. And so a common slide in my workshop decks for digital transformation in large companies is the peanut butter slide from Yahoo. There's a famous memo from Yahoo where one of the executives leaked it out because he thought that they were spreading themselves too thin. They didn't have a clear strategy. They were placing bets on everything, you know, like a roulette table, putting on everything. And so he called it peanut butter, like this thin layer of peanut butter. And he's like, let's not peanut butter ourselves. So we've turned it into a verb. So don't peanut butter yourselves. Don't bite off too many things. The other analogy is from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People with the big rocks, the pebbles, and the sand. Like, just be mindful of the big rocks. Take care of your big rocks. What are the, like, 2 or 3 things that are really important to do this quarter or this year? And yes, other stuff's going to come up. The sand's going to come up, other meetings, bug fixes, live site issues. But having that list, and maybe even visible, like on a whiteboard or on a sticky note, so that you constantly remind yourself, so that the sand doesn't overwhelm you.
Great. Let's go to a question from Kevin. Any advice on focus for product managers of internal digital products versus B2B, B2C products? What are the main differences to consider? This is a good question for you, Dan.
Yeah, and I talk to a lot of people I talk with are developing internal tools. That's the funny thing too, is you see as companies build tools, they now have PMs internally working on those tools, so not even customer facing, which makes sense. So then you go, the funny thing is a lot of times people will use the fact that it's an internal tool to kind of cut corners and be like, yeah, the UX design, they have to use it. The feeling sometimes is that the people have to use it, right? And the reality is they don't have to use it, then they won't use it. They'll come up with some workarounds. There's always some other alternative, some other workaround. One of my favorite, I'm actually giving a talk on UX design tonight at my meetup, and I'm going to show a slide. One of my favorite pictures is this nice, like, it's in this park, this nice sidewalk, and it like makes a nice 90-degree intersection. And there's just like this well-worn path across the grass, taking the shortcut. People are going to take the path of least resistance. And if your product is too difficult, it's not going to work out, right? And I was teaching a workshop once, and it was so funny because there were a lot of employees that had to use this tool supposedly, and someone, after I talked about the importance for being customer centric and having empathy for users and doing a good job in UX design, someone raised their hand and said, yeah, but there are employees that have to use it. In the back of my head, I'm like, man, I'm just thinking of that path. They're not going to use it. They're going to, and then luckily someone in the back of the room raised their hand. I'm like, yes. They're like, well, let me tell you, I used to be one of those employees before I came to corporate, and we wouldn't use it. If it was bad, here's what we would do. So I was like, yes, somebody validated that, right? So number one is you can definitely apply all the same customer-centric techniques, right? And in a sense, you have it easier because you have access to your people. They're there. You have access to them. A lot of times B2B sales, like, how do I get, we're selling to Fortune 1000 CMOs. How do I get one on the phone? Like, they're not going to make the time for you. But internal employees are there. So I think, and then the other thing, back to the metrics and the ROI, we're not driving revenue with internal tools, obviously. We're not making money off of them. So what's the metric? Oftentimes the metric is productivity or time savings or cost savings, right? That's the idea. And when I was working with some of these clients, instead of focusing on incremental revenue or customer value, we'd be like, what's the cost savings if we refactor this tool? Or what's the time savings? Our associates it takes them like 30 minutes to do this task today with today's tool. We think with the version 2 tool, that'll reduce it to 15 minutes. Well, now all of a sudden you can, so that's ways to quantify the ROI of internal products.
Yeah, one thing I think about with this too, and it's very hard to do this well, but imagine that this internal tool that you're building is going to be used by other customers, right? Imagine that you're building something that actually would be used not just by the internal team. Now they are customers, but if you need to get yourself into that customer mindset, imagine you're building it for other companies. And that can't always work, but it can work a lot. And if you think about some of the great innovations like, AWS, I mean, AWS was built for Amazon first, right? And then it became, arguably one of the most successful products ever. And so it's not only to get yourself in the right mindset, but you could be building something that you could actually turn into a business later, right? Don't preclude that.
Good point.
Perfect, thank you. Looking at the
I'm
time.
going to add 2 other ones. I want to add 2 other ones. This is the funny thing, right? So Flickr, we all know Flickr, the photo website, right? It didn't start out as a photo website. It started out as a game. And because the team was remote, speaking of remote teams, and they needed to share these image assets, they built an internal tool for themselves to share the photos. And the game didn't take off, but it became Flickr, and it got acquired by Yahoo for a lot of money. And then years later, that same entrepreneur went to make another game. and he had a remote team again. And for his team to collaborate, they built this awesome chat platform that became Slack. So there are two other examples of things that started out as internal tools that solved the need so well that they went on to be successful. So they say Stuart is the world's richest but worst game designer in the world. I'd love to work on his next game with him. That would be awesome.
Let's jump to this question. What would be the key elements for a successful product launch or key essentials for a go-to-market plan? Rachel, do you want to take this one?
Well, I think it depends on a number of things. I mean, if it's a B2C product, a B2B product, I'm a little bit more familiar with the B2B space. But I think it goes back a little bit to what are you trying to drive? Like, what are your goals? What are the metrics that you're trying to move? What are you trying to achieve for the business? And so the go-to-market really has to align with that. And then also, same way I was talking about pricing and thinking about at the beginning, you really have to think about how you want to go to market with something at the beginning of the process, not just at the end of the process, because then you're trying to force fit something that you've already gone far down the path, and it's harder to do it. So it's a hard question to answer, because again, it depends on a lot of things, but you want your go-to-market to align to, like, if what you're trying to do is make sure that you're driving retention, it's one thing. If you're launching a new product and you're trying to drive revenue, then that's another thing. And your go-to-market can be much more around traditional measures of, how many people do you want to have trying it? What sort of people, users that you want to bring in? Are you reaching the right people, and how you're doing it? But yeah, it's a little bit of a tough question to answer, because it depends on so many things. But I would say the key thing is think about all the elements of your go-to-market early. You don't have to figure them all out. They don't have to be perfect, but at least think about, one of the ways Amazon does things is they write the press release from the beginning. That's always a great practice, to think about these things early on.
Yeah, and I would just add on that, as a PM, you may feel like overwhelmed just working with, doing the research and discovery and the designers and the developers. You're so busy just trying to get this thing defined, designed, and built, and the bugs fixed, and is it ready for launch, that a lot of teams that go to market is an afterthought, or they just don't have time. Like, okay, we're done. We're on to the next one. Somebody else marketing, you figure it out, right? And as opposed to having tight cross-functional coordination. So I think that's the number one thing I would say is there should be tight coordination, because the PM knows the most about the product, and you need to think about how does the knowledge transfer and collaboration with marketing happen. Say, okay, and one of the funniest things I always see too is, like, you'll be working on some new feature and you'll call it like the Gizmo, and I know that's just an internal name we're gonna use. Now we're just calling it, I'm on the Gizmo team. Hey, we're doing Gizmo. Next thing you know, that's what it's called in the press release, because nobody ever explicitly named it. And so this happens all the time, where some internal jargony name, because no one was deliberate. So I think, one, you want to be deliberate in your go-to-market. That's deliberate in your messaging, right? And have coordination with PM. And back to Rachel's point, in my lean product process, one of the most important steps is your value proposition, where you get really clear on what are the unique benefits, how is our product going to be better or different than the competition. Well, in the product world, once we have clarity on that, we take it and go down the, let's define our feature set, let's define the UX design, and go down and build it. We go down that path. That's a great point. To Rachel's point, you can tee off then earlier. Messaging and marketing can start working then and say, okay, we know our value prop, and from here, we're going to go come up with this positioning and this messaging and these campaigns that go with that. So there's no reason you can't have that lead time, and it's fine. Marketing can drive it. It's not like PM needs one more thing for you to drive. Marketing can drive it, but you need to be involved as a PM. And in one of my talks, I talk about Instagram has a great example from the early days. Their tagline was fast, beautiful photo sharing, which summarizes their value proposition in 4 words. So the product team can go execute on that, and then the marketing team can also go execute on that. So I would just say is to carve out time and work it into the time. I know you already feel like your head's underwater just trying to deliver the product, and sometimes you may not have marketing counterparts. It just depends on what kind of bandwidth you have. But if you do have them, then it's good to sync up sooner rather than later, like Rachel was saying.
Perfect. I think our time is up, so we'll end on this note. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Dan, for your time today. Thanks to the audience for attending. We'll share a recording of this Fireside chat this afternoon. And again, thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.